Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
2022 was a rough year for Kadin Black. The popular high school athlete had moved from Pennsylvania to Maryland with his mother, but had recently moved back to his father's house in Pennsylvania so that he could be closer to his friends. The move, however, came with its own set of challenges. Fights at school led to him being expelled, and a fight with his father led to an arrest, a psychiatric hold, and needing to find a new place to live. Thankfully, the family of one of his childhood friends, the Fousts, agreed to take him in. The arrangement seemed to work out for everyone, and the Foust family, especially the father, Chris, helped Kadin get back on track. But then, in December 2022, Kadin mysteriously vanished. It took several days for his parents to find out that their son was missing, and when they did, there were questions surrounding when he was last seen. In modern missing persons cases, there are usually plenty of theories to be found on social media, and Kadin's case is certainly no exception. Did the 19-year-old leave on his own to avoid his upcoming trial? Did he harm himself? Did the Foust family, who graciously took him in, actually have something to do with his disappearance? We'll be talking about all of this and more as we dig into the story of Kadin Black. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Kadin Black. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again. I'm Kona.
And I'm Ethan.
And we're the husband and wife team behind this podcast. Each week, I tell you the story of an unsolved missing persons case. Ethan does not know anything about the case going into the episode, and he's here to provide his reactions and questions in real time, hopefully asking some of the same ones you have at home. Now, this week's case is a recent one, as you probably gathered from the intro.
Yes.
And it was actually suggested by a listener of ours. Now, as of this recording, Kadin has been missing for less than a year and a half. This case is also one with a lot of finger pointing, which of course we'll be getting into. But more importantly, while it's had a fair amount of local coverage, Kadin's disappearance hasn't gotten a ton of national attention. So I'm hoping that this will help get his name out there a little bit more. Before we get started, though, we've had some fine folks join us over on Patreon, so I want to make sure I give them a shout out. Thank you very much to Lily C, Ashley K, Megan F, Melissa L, Molly, and Maida F. That is a lot of M names who joined us. I just noticed that.
Just random alliteration.
Yeah, thank you, all of you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
As a reminder, you can get access to ad-free episodes by joining our Patreon at any level or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts. Now, with that business out of the way, let's get right into the case of Kadin Black. Kadin McAllister Black was born on December 10th, 2003 in Pennsylvania to Kara Leatherwood and Maurice Black. Kara and Maurice had 3 boys together, Jordan, Kadin, and Carter. Kara and Maurice divorced when Kadin was around 3 or 4, and the boys primarily lived with their mother. But Maurice lived across town, so everybody remained close. Kadin has been described by everyone who knew him as someone who was completely incapable of staying still.
That sounds familiar.
He mainly channeled this energy into sports and grew up playing football. Kadin also ran track and enjoyed BMX bike riding. He would also go to the local park and play basketball and eventually joined a boxing gym.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's all over the place.
Oh, and he would run a lot too. If he was just bored, he'd go out for a run. He was that type of guy.
That's a lot.
It is. It was a lot. So basically, if it involved physical activity, he was in.
Somebody get that boy an Xbox.
Well, no, he did play video games too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But no, he did that. Like, he did it all. Though sports came easy for Kadin, not everything else did. Throughout his life, he struggled with what can broadly be described as emotional dysregulation. He was a sweet, kind kid who loved to help people and would stand up to bullies. But he also had anger issues. Kadin attended Eastern York High School, and though he was a star athlete and well-liked, he also started getting into fights, which obviously caused problems at school. Kadin was evaluated, it sounds like a few times during his high school years, if not earlier, and he was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum and as having ODD, or oppositional defiance disorder. It was also said that he had anxiety with OCD tendencies.
All right, that's also a lot.
It is. And, again, I think this was a couple of different diagnoses at different times.
So do you think these are different diagnoses trying to get to pinpoint the issues of the same problem?
Yes, I do. And
They may not be concurrent. It might be different opinions.
Yeah, like one man's opinion versus another.
Okay.
So I do want to talk about that because, a quick note about ODD.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. I don't know anything. I mean, I can gather from the name what it means, but...
Yeah, so it's very controversial and, in short, a bullshit diagnosis. Now, I've always believed that just based on, I don't know, different things that I've read or, whatever I've known about it. Of course, I'm not an expert. So I actually asked I asked my own therapist, at the end of my session, I said, hey, on an unrelated note, what are your thoughts on oppositional defiance disorder? And she says she hates it, which, again, was my feeling, but I wanted to kind of get a professional's take on it. It always struck me as a way to attach a label to people, mainly kids, while often ignoring underlying issues. And she pretty much said the same thing. But then, interestingly, which I never knew, and again, I didn't tell her what this was about or why I was asking, she said that it was disproportionately diagnosed with teenage boys, especially teenage boys of color, which Kadin is. So Kadin's father, Maurice, is Black and his mother, Kara, is white. So he's biracial. And yeah, so teenage boys of color receive this diagnosis more often than other demographics. She says that basically it's a way to attach a label to a kid if you need one for an IEP in school or something like that, but it really ignores a lot of underlying issues, which often do include anxiety and depression.
That's interesting because when I was working in social services, we would see a lot of basically the same thing with ADHD with young kids of color, where it was basically the same thing. They would say the kid has ADHD and just completely ignore why they were acting out.
Right.
And then they just put them on Ritalin and
called it a day.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And didn't want to treat any of the other issues that they had.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. And I mean, even a name like oppositional defiance disorder, I mean, that is just really a fancy way of saying this is a bad kid.
Yeah. Right. Or, somebody that I don't want to even say acts out against authority.
Right.
Could just be a kid that questions authority.
Yeah.
Like any teenager does.
Right. So again, we could get into a whole rabbit hole about this, but, I did want to bring it up because I think that Kadin's mental health struggles, which were certainly real, the way they were handled by various people at various points in his life, potentially did play a part in his eventual disappearance.
Now, with any of these diagnoses, was he ever given any type of medication?
From what I understand, he was kind of on and off different medications. Now, when he was living in Maryland with his mother, he was going to therapy once a week. but once he moved back to Pennsylvania, he had stopped therapy.
Gotcha.
So around this time, I believe it was around, his sophomore year of high school, his mother, Kara, got a new job and moved to Hampstead, Maryland. Now, where they lived in Pennsylvania was already pretty close to the Maryland border, so this move only took them about an hour away.
And you said they lived in York?
Yeah, York County.
Gotcha.
Kara thought that the move and switching schools would give Kadin a fresh start and a better chance at a successful high school career. And it seems like it did. So she said at one point that he did go to a school there that had specialized programs that really helped him. And he excelled. He was getting A's and B's. He got really close to the principal, who she said was this amazing man. But the school didn't have a sports program. And that was Kadin's true passion. So he didn't want to go there. So he ended up going to, a different school nearby in Maryland, and it did not go well. So this school was in Westminster, Maryland, and he did not make it through the school year before he told his mother that he wanted to move back to Pennsylvania. He missed his friends at Eastern and basically just wasn't feeling Maryland. He didn't like his new school. They originally, I think, lived out on a farm somewhere, although she moved to kind of the main drag. But it wasn't his thing, He just wanted to go back to where he grew up.
It should also be noted, though, that York County is pretty rural in Pennsylvania. So,
oh, for sure. And it's important to bring that up because I mentioned that Kadin's biracial, and York County, in addition to being extremely rural, is extremely white.
You don't say.
The population is about 2% Black people.
Well, York, Pennsylvania has a song entitled Shit Town named after it.
I knew you were going to find an
excuse
excuse to bring up live.
I had to. Come on.
So Kara didn't want him to move back because, again, he was her son. She didn't want him to move out in general.
Yeah.
And, she didn't want him to move to Pennsylvania. She didn't think it was going to make things better. She was generally against it. But his father, who still lived back there, was on board. And at that point, Kadin...
For the same reasons, I'm sure he wanted his son with him.
Exactly. And Kadin was almost 18 at this point.
So it's up to him.
Yeah. Not technically you could be technically you're 17, but he was almost 18. So they decided to just go for it. So Kadin moved back to Pennsylvania to his father's house and re-enrolled in Eastern. But that's when everything really started to fall apart for the teenager. Kadin quickly began having problems in school and started getting into fights again. According to his father, he was standing up to bullies, and that's why he was getting into fights. And while that may be true, he did end up getting expelled. After being forced to leave Eastern, Kadin was enrolled in Paradise School in Abbottstown, an alternative school that was a solid 40 minutes away from Wrightsville.
Jesus, how did he get there? Did they provide transportation?
Oh, they did, and we are going to get way into the transportation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Now, according to their website, quote, Paradise School provides intensive, individualized academic and social emotional support for students experiencing significant social, emotional, and or behavioral difficulties, end quote.
Sounds like a youth prison camp.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of alternative high schools in general, and I definitely have further opinions based on the rest of the methods listed on their website, but that's really beside the point.
Okay.
The point of this is that on April 4th, 2022, Kadin, who was 18 at this time, was riding on the school van. Now, I saw it referred to as a van. Other times it's referred to as a bus. But regardless, it's the transportation that the school provided to get him there. Kadin was assigned a seat on the back of the bus, apparently due to past bad behavior. Now, this already doesn't make sense to me because generally in a bus or a classroom, the kid who acts up is moved closer to the authority figure, not further away.
I guess maybe it depends on who the bad behavior was directed towards.
Maybe?
Maybe the bus driver didn't want to deal with him?
Yeah, well, probably based on what happens next. In either case, according to a criminal complaint, this was a mandate from the school, because the school is ultimately who makes the decisions and rules on the bus, not actually the bus driver. So on this day that we're talking about, April 4th, Kadin decided to move up to another seat, which was a rule violation. Now, before I get into what happened next, Kara has posted about this incident a few times on the Find Kadin Black Facebook page. In one of these posts, she refers to the Pennsylvania Bus Driver's Manual. So, of course, I needed to go look that up to put all of this into context. And that's why I could not stop writing this. Once Kadin moved up to a different seat, the bus driver pulled the bus over and told Kadin he was tired of his insolence.
Okay.
And now this is mostly in line with the policy manual, which states that a bus driver should, quote, drive out of traffic to a safe location, stop and secure the bus. This may be in a parking lot or a driveway, end quote.
Does it specifically say to use the word insolent in there? Or
it doesn't. That's why I said it's mostly in line, you know?
Or did this bus driver just have a thesaurus?
Yeah, I think that's
who
kind of
uses
a great...
that in,
I don't know, but...
in general context?
Yeah. The manual says that this is what you should do in the event of a serious discipline problem, such as a fight.
To pull the bus over?
Correct.
Okay. So not this him moving seats is not or should not be considered
a serious. Right. If that's all it is, right?
Yeah.
But okay, you know, again, I feel like it's kind of a gray area, right? Because one person's serious is another person's minor.
Right.
Who knows what's been leading up to this? Now, the driver is then supposed to get up, face the students, and, quote, address the offenders in a courteous manner, but in a firm voice, end quote.
I'm tired of your insolence.
Yes. But it says, like, specifically, you're not supposed to raise your voice. You're not supposed to humiliate anyone. You're not, you know, like, it gives them a lot of specifics on, like, how to handle disciplinary situations on the bus. It really goes into a lot of depth. They're supposed to relay what the acceptable behavior is and then give the consequences if this behavior is not followed. The manual specifically says, quote, before you specify related consequences, be sure they are supported by existing policy and the school principal you are willing to follow through, and they are within your power to initiate. Now, they are within your power to initiate is in all caps, in bold, and underlined in this manual.
I'm not even sure what that means.
Well, let me tell you what it doesn't mean. What this bus driver did. He pulled over on the side of Route 30.
Okay.
So not in a driveway or a parking lot, and told Kadin to get off the bus.
Okay. Because he moved seats.
Mm-hmm. And he was tired of his insolence.
Okay. So not a serious offense or rule violation.
No, it was a rule violation.
No, but not a serious one.
Yeah, it wasn't a fight. Like, at that point, nothing was violent. Nothing was crazy. He wasn't, like, throwing things or, you know, whatever.
And he pulls off on the side of a highway. I mean, I'm relatively familiar with Route 30, not necessarily in that area, but it runs all through Pennsylvania.
It does, yeah.
So it at times fluctuates between a 2 to 4 lane highway, but
right. And I don't know exactly where he pulled over.
Sure.
Because again, it was a 40-minute drive, so, you know.
Right, but either way, Route 30, the entire stretch is pretty busy. It's usually dotted with towns,
yeah.
So the speed fluctuates from, 55 to 35 or 25 depending on where you're at. But it's a pretty well-traveled road. Right.
So, not good. I mean, not where we should be starting off.
Yeah, and then he says, get off the bus?
Yeah, get off the bus. Like, where?
Yeah, and what's he going to do? Like, we don't know how far away he is from his house or the school or whatever. Like, you can't just tell a kid to get off the bus in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and it literally says that in the manual. Like, what you're supposed to do is, if you're close enough to the school, you go back to the school. or, go to the school, right? And then let them handle it. Or if you're not, you stop the bus and then you radio somebody to come, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what you're supposed to do. Like telling a kid to get off the bus is never what you're supposed to be doing. So I'm prefacing that because I do think that context is important. I don't think it necessarily excuses what happens next. Again, this is according to the criminal complaint. So according to this, Kadin took off his shirt, confronted the driver, and slammed the bus door shut. He then threw a clipboard and papers out of the van. So, like, I guess, I don't know how you slam it shut and then throw stuff out, but in any case. The bus driver told police that Kadin, quote, became aggressive, grabbing him by the throat with his left hand and striking them in the face with his right, end quote. Which is very bad.
Yes.
Like, what the bus driver did was absolutely wrong, but not how you react.
But at the same time, I'm sure that didn't go from, I'm tired of your insolence, get off the bus, to then Kadin doing that.
But according to the criminal complaint, that's exactly what happened.
So just out of nowhere.
Yes. It's like, you can't talk to me, and then attacked him, basically. Then the driver, according to him, grabbed a handful of Kadin's hair, basically while he's being like choked and punched, right? Mm-hmm. Grabbed a handful of Kadin's hair, to which Kadin responded, quote, let go of my hair or I'll kill you, end quote.
Well, whatever, heat of the moment.
Yeah. Now, again, I am not excusing any violence that Kadin may have initiated. Like, bus drivers should not be subjected to violence from the students they're driving. However, the bus driver was not only out of policy, he reacted completely inappropriately as someone who works with kids who literally go to a school because they have emotional and behavioral problems. And that's, again, just if you take the criminal complaint at face value. Like, so if you just believe that this is exactly what happened and the order in which it happened.
Which I don't.
Right.
There were definitely more words exchanged than that.
Right. I would believe that too. And according to Kara, the bus had surveillance video, which a lot of school transportation does. And she said that she and Kadin's attorney viewed this video. And it showed that Kadin actually acted in self-defense. Now, I haven't seen the video, so I can't say what really happened on that bus. Whether, he did actually act in self-defense or, it happened more like the bus driver said. Regardless, it was a bad situation in which both of them, potentially were in the wrong to a degree, but one was a high school student and one was an adult.
Yes.
Who was hired to drive around students with emotional and behavioral issues.
Yep.
So anyway, I know that we went off on kind of like a tangent about this whole thing, and really kind of got into the details. And I really did read a lot of that manual, but I really think that it's important. And I think that it's important because Kadin has been portrayed a certain way in a lot of the things that you read about this case. And this incident was a major event for him in 2022. And it's very possible that in one way or another, this also played a part in his disappearance. So I think it's really important to talk about it a lot and really give as much context to it as possible. I mentioned a criminal complaint. Police were called. I mean, as you would imagine.
I mean, they definitely should have been, regardless of who's in the right or wrong.
Yeah. And Kadin was arrested. Now, he was hit with a ton of charges, including 2 felony charges of aggravated assault. He was also charged with strangulation, simple assault, reckless endangerment, and disorderly conduct, which are all misdemeanors. He was also charged with harassment subject to other physical contact, which I believe it was an S. So you said that was like a summary judgment? Summary
offense. That would be my guess. I mean, every jurisdiction is going to register those differently, but if it's listed as F for felony, M for misdemeanor.
Yeah.
I would assume an S would be a summary offense.
Okay, yeah. So that was listed as an S, and then also terroristic threats.
Which terroristic threats was above choking? Is that what I remember?
No, I think that was also a misdemeanor.
Yes, but choking was a summary offense.
No. Choking was a misdemeanor. The summary offense was harassment. But yeah, the strangulation was a misdemeanor, which I find wild.
Yeah.
But no, the only 2 felonies were the aggravated assault. Now, in York County, and I had to look this up because I read it and I was like, this doesn't sound right. But people who are incarcerated awaiting trial are not sent to a local jail. Instead, they are sent to York County Prison.
Interesting.
Yes. And according to their website, they hold people who are awaiting trial or have been convicted and are serving sentences up to 5 years. So, I mean, if they're serving sentences over 5 years, I don't know if they go to a state prison or how that works.
Yeah. Pennsylvania, anything over 5 years is a state sentence.
But yeah, so he did not just go to like the county jail or, anything like that. Like he went to straight up adult prison. Kadin's bail was set on April 13th, 2022, and according to court documents was posted on April 17th. So it seems as though he spent about 4 days in prison while his family engaged a bail bondsman in order to get him out. After he was released on bail, Kadin returned to live at his father's house, but things continued to be rocky in the young man's life. A few months later, Kadin and his father got into a fight. According to Maurice, the two had already been bumping heads prior to the school bus incident. But on this particular day, Maurice says that Kadin was, quote, setting pictures of himself on fire, and he was just angry in general. He was just off. He wasn't his normal self that day, end quote.
Setting pictures of himself on fire.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, this kid wasn't just, like, ooh, I don't like people telling me what to do. Like, he clearly had a lot of underlying things going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Maurice didn't give specifics on the altercation between him and his son, but said that what happened that day was mostly on him, meaning Maurice. But this fight was bad enough that someone, I believe it was Maurice's fiance, called the police. According to an article that was published in the York Daily Record that was then republished in the Evening Sun, which is where I'm pulling this from, Kadin told police that he didn't want to live. Kara, however, disputes this account, saying that it was actually Maurice's fiance who told police that she was afraid that Kadin would hurt himself. Regardless of who made the statement, the effect was that instead of being taken to jail, Kadin was taken to York Hospital and put under an involuntary hold under Section 302 of Pennsylvania's Mental Health Procedures Act.
Yep.
A lot of states have this act. It's called different things in different states. California, it's a 5150. But yes.
DC, it's 313.
Yeah. So a lot of states have this thing where if you're determined to be a threat to yourself or others, you can be placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold, usually lasting about 72 hours.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty standard.
Mm-hmm. Maurice later said that he did this so his son could get the mental help he believed he needed, saying, quote, I didn't want to see him go to jail. I wanted him to get help for his anger issues. As long as he got help, I would drop the charges. I just wanted him to get help. That was the only way he could get help, end quote.
I mean, he didn't want to look into getting Kadin a therapist?
I mean, honestly, that's kind of my thought on it too. Like, I feel like involving the police, especially with somebody who's already facing major charges.
It's probably not the best idea.
No, if you're thinking, oh, I don't want him to actually go to jail, like, it's not the move.
I mean, yeah, you don't want him to go to jail. Don't involve the cops.
Yeah. But it also makes me wonder, too, if, Kara's correct and it was his fiance who said that Kadin wanted to hurt himself. If they said that specifically because they knew it would trigger a hold instead of taking him to jail.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, which is interesting. So then it really goes to like what Kadin's mental state actually was. Because, Maurice says, I wanted him to get help for his anger issues, not I wanted him to get help because I was afraid for his life.
Right. Yeah, because I was afraid he was suicidal.
Right. So
yeah,
I find that interesting. And it's probably something we should store in the back of our heads. This is the point in the story in which we meet Chris Foust. Now, we've had a lot of new listeners lately, so before we get into Chris and the rest of the Foust family, I would like to remind everyone listening that I am not a journalist. This is an opinion-based podcast, and I make no claims of being unbiased. With that said, I do try to be as fair as possible. I don't believe in being the devil's advocate because the devil doesn't need an advocate, but I do like to try to look at, all sides of an issue. But between the article that I was talking about before and Facebook posts that Chris himself has made, I have a lot of conflicting feelings about this family.
The Foust family.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this could be partly because of the writer of that article, but in it, the Fousts come off as the white saviors who came in and saved this poor, troubled Black teenager. This impression has caused a lot of pain for Kadin's family, who said that Kadin comes from a loving, stable family to whom he was very close. Like, yes, his parents were divorced, but
I mean, that doesn't really mean much.
It doesn't automatically mean you come from like a bad family or, you don't have support or anything like that. So let's get into what Chris said happened after Kadin was hospitalized. Now, this is not a quote from Chris himself, but is directly from the article. Quote, Chris Foust was at the dentist when he got a call informing him that Kadin was in the hospital. He bolted out of his appointment and went to see him. When he saw Kadin, they hug. Chris spent 4 or 5 hours with Kadin that day, just talking. End quote.
But wait a minute. So apparently Chris already knew Kadin?
Yes.
How?
Well, good question. Ethan Foust, Chris's son, had been one of Kadin's best friends since middle school. Kadin had spent a good deal of time over at the Foust's home playing video games with Ethan and swimming in thetheir backyard pool during the summers. They had the above-ground backyard pool, which everybody in Pennsylvania loves.
Yes.
And it's so cute because I looked at the house on Google Earth and like everybody has an above-ground pool in the neighborhood. We're in Northern Virginia and that's not really a thing here so much, so I really do enjoy that about Pennsylvania.
About the above ground versus in ground pools?
Yeah, I just love how it's like a cultural thing that everybody has an above ground pool there.
Well, the ground stays frozen a lot longer up there, so it's kind of pointless to have an in ground pool.
Yeah, but I like it. Now, according to Chris, when he went to the hospital, so basically what happened is when the police came, they took him to the ER. He then went through an intake process and was placed into the hospital's mental health facility. So Chris ended up going to see him there and said that Kadin was acting out at first and had trashed his room. Once Kadin was medicated, however, he began to calm down. Now, what the medication was for, however, is unknown. It was likely just a generic mood stabilizer, like an Ativan, like just something along those lines that they would kind of give to anybody. Because, they didn't have the time at that moment to do a full workup and diagnosis, right? But as far as anyone knows, Kadin actually didn't receive an official diagnosis the entire time he was in the hospital. Now, he would have, but he unfortunately contracted COVID, which delayed that process. And he was there. We talked about how these holds are often for 72 hours. I think he was there for about a month, if I'm not mistaken.
Because of the COVID? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. But I think that was a factor. I don't know if that was the entire reason, but he was there for quite a while. Now, Chris continued to visit Kadin every day, bringing him magazines to entertain himself. I mean, I'm guessing this was prior to the COVID diagnosis, but I don't know. Chris is an air traffic controller by trade, but he also took a theology course through Liberty University. So he also gave Kadin spiritual guidance. On one of his visits, he gave him a Bible, and the two often talked about the healing powers of faith. Liberty University in general, again, as somebody who's lived in Virginia my entire life, for the most part, is a huge red flag for me. But so is this next quote from Chris. Quote, he just wanted to be loved, end quote. Which don't we all? But also, Kadin was and is extremely loved. He has an entire family who dearly loves him. That's not to say that anyone couldn't use more people in their lives to love them, but he did have people.
So I'm curious, other than Kadin and Ethan being best friends, what was Chris's angle here?
I don't know. That was it. That's how he knew Kadin. I don't know, like, how he actually found out about Kadin being in the hospital, like who was the one who called him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Because they're not going to let you take your cell phone into the psych wing.
Right, exactly. So somebody, so I don't know. Somebody must have contacted somebody who then contacted him. I didn't get the impression that Kadin's parents like knew Chris all that well before all this happened. I mean, they might have, but I didn't get the impression that they were friends. Like maybe one of them called Chris, but I don't know. I just didn't get that impression, but I don't know how he actually found out. After Kadin recovered from COVID and he was allowed to leave the hospital, he was not allowed to return home. Unfortunately, because he was out on bail at the time of this fight with his father, Kadin had to return to York Prison to await another bail hearing.
Yep.
Kara and Chris tried to bail Kadin out immediately, but there were delays. Kadin ended up staying in prison for several weeks, and Chris recalls seeing him with cuts and bruises from fights with other inmates.
Why was he in for several weeks?
Like I said, it was just delays. Like apparently there were staffing problems. There, just like normal bureaucratic like nonsense that delayed him getting his new bail hearing. His original bail was eventually reinstated and was posted on August 9th. Now, after the altercation with his father, which kind of caused this whole thing, Kadin didn't want to return to his home. He also wasn't going to return to Paradise School because of the bus incident, but he didn't want to move back to Maryland either. He was kind of adrift at this point. And that left the Fousts. They agreed to take him in, and Kadin was released into Chris's custody. In the article, it says that the Fousts painted a room for Kadin and bought him a new bed because they wanted him to feel as though he's part of the family. And, that's lovely. But what's less lovely is that the Fousts seemingly added another dig at Kadin's family right after, saying that when Kadin arrived, he wanted to go for a walk. So they did. And while they were out, Maurice allegedly passed by in his truck and didn't acknowledge his son.
Okay.
This is just something they brought up in the article. And I've never seen Maurice address this claim, and he was interviewed for this same article. So I don't know about its veracity, but like, it's an interesting detail for them to add.
Yeah, like Maurice could have just been driving somewhere and not paying attention to a group of people walking on the side of the road.
Yeah, or on the sidewalk, or, I don't think it was like on the side of the road.
Sure, whatever.
Yeah, it was like downtown. So yeah, he could have not noticed them. It could have not been him. I mean, there are all sorts of...
Or it could have also never happened.
Also, yeah. So it's just a weird thing to say. According to the Fousts, Kadin did well in their home. He was working on getting his GED, and he started a lawn care business. But apparently when he bought new mowers in order to expand the business, they were stolen.
Okay.
Which, I don't know. Well, it's just weird to me because the Faust's house, has a fenced-in backyard and a 2-car garage. It's a very large garage. Like, where were these mowers? Where were they stolen from? How did that happen? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's never addressed again in anything else I've read. I don't know.
There's no proof to any of these claims, and nobody's going to look into it because who the hell cares? But it seems to add to the Fousts just kind of, I don't know, painting themselves as better people than they are, or I don't know. I don't know anything about the Fousts.
But it does feel like a self-aggrandizement because Chris says when he's kind of relaying this little anecdote, he's like, with Kadin, it was always 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's like, it's just another just weird thing to say or to talk about. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Okay, but I am going to say some nice things about the Fousts before I get into the wildest quote from the article. From what I've been able to gather about Chris Foust from his interview and many Facebook posts, like, he's an active guy. I mentioned that he was an air traffic controller. Now, I couldn't find this out specifically, but being that Chris is in his mid-40s, I believe he's 46 right now, there's a good chance that he's actually retired from that job. Retirement before 50 is not uncommon for air traffic controllers who get into the job young. Like, it has, in terms of federal government retirements, it's, I think, the shortest kind of time period that you have to serve in order to get it.
Yeah, because there's a really high rate of burnout.
Exactly, right? So I think, by this time he's like 45. I think he could have already been out. And so I bring that up because the impression that I get of him is that he's a relatively young guy with a lot of time on his hands. So he's constantly trying to stay busy. He posts about going to the gym, tackling DIY projects around the house, and he apparently has a passion for fixing up cars. And this really made Kadin a perfect companion for him, as he had many of the same interests and a similar inability to stay still. In several Facebook posts that are still public, Kadin and Chris can be seen doing many of these activities together. They did a 20-mile bike ride. They're working on cars. They're lifting weights. Like, they're doing all of these things, right? So it genuinely seems to me that, at least for a while, this whole arrangement was a good fit.
Until
Kadin disappeared, right? So while Chris enjoys fixing up cars, he, for whatever reason, especially seems to enjoy Toyotas. At the time, he had 2 4Runners and a Corolla. Coincidentally, Kara also had a 4Runner, which Kadin had used while he lived in Maryland. Now, this was like a 2002, so it needed some work. I mean, it ran. Like I said, he used it. But Chris decided that he and Kadin would make a project out of fixing it up.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. So according to Kara, she met up with them and turned over the car. Now, Kadin couldn't afford insurance. He didn't have a job at this time. So Chris told her that he would just put the car in his policy. However, he said that in order to do that, the car had to be in his name.
Yep.
Since Kadin was living with them, Kara's like, okay, whatever, makes sense. He can't afford his own insurance policy. Like, fine, whatever. So she agreed, gave the car to Kadin, but allowed Chris to put it in his name and on his insurance. Kadin and Chris added fixing up the 4Runner to their list of activities, and all was well for a few months. Before I get to December, when things started to change, I want to get back to that wild quote that I mentioned earlier. Now, this comes from Amy Foust, Chris's wife. She says, quote, "He felt he didn't deserve what we were doing for him. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that 2 people who barely knew him cared about him. He looked at us and our family and wondered why he couldn't have that. He just wanted to start over and have a better life." End quote.
I mean, so if that's something that Kadin actually said, then that leads me to question his family of origin, and like there might be some issues there that could have led to his ODD diagnosis or whatever. However, she doesn't specifically say that he said that.
Yeah, you're right. She says he felt he didn't deserve, like he couldn't wrap his head. He looked at our family and wondered. Like, yeah, I mean, these are not.
Yeah. Did he actually say these things,
right,
or is this something that she is saying that she thought he was thinking?
Yeah. I don't know. And again, it just goes back to the like white savior, self-aggrandizing thing that really
it doesn't seem genuine.
It's just gross to me. And I feel like it's weird because she says 2 people who barely knew him.
Right. But yet Chris jumped out of his dentist chair or whatever to run to the hospital, and they hugged when they saw each other.
And it's like he didn't run to the hospital because Kadin was in a car accident and he was clinging to life. Like, he was admitted to be held on, a psychiatric hold. Like, I feel like you could have waited to the end of your dentist appointment.
And also, like, if they had that type of relationship when he went to the hospital for a psych eval, where the fuck was he when he went to jail?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the first time. Yeah, I have no idea.
That's what
because, yeah, when everything happened with the bus, like, I don't know.
Where was Chris then?
I don't know. And not that I would expect, like, the parent of your friend to be there, but if he's apparently, a couple months later jumping out of a dentist chair,
right?
Like, maybe he should have been. I don't know.
Just seems like slightly odd behavior to all of a sudden be like, oh, we're so tight that now I'm going to go run and help this kid.
Right. And it's so weird. And that's why I struggle so much with this. And, there's more coming up, but it's like, I really genuinely do feel as though Chris cared about Kadin and really enjoyed his company and really like had a lot of good times with him, right? And wanted to help him sincerely. But then he and his wife are just saying all this like weird, gross shit.
Yeah.
Like I have a hard time with it. I just can't quite.
Was Ethan ever interviewed?
He was. He actually does have a few quotes in this article, but they're all very like benign. Like, yeah, Kadin and I met in middle school. Like,
we were friends.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't say anything,
Mm-hmm.
It should also be mentioned that this article in which, Amy gives this quote was said to a reporter 9 months after a teenager vanished while in their care.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's such a weird thing to say. And again, Kadin had a family who loved him. He was not some orphan that they took in. The whole reason, in fact, why Kadin didn't have a car already was because instead of using his father's extra car when he moved back up to Pennsylvania, he told his parents that they should give it to his younger brother, Carter, because Carter had just gotten his driver's license. So he wanted his little brother to have the car instead.
Yeah, not somebody that is like from a broken, unsupported family.
Exactly. And yes, his relationship with his father is complicated. Like, nobody's denying that. We're not trying to paint that as a rosy situation. Obviously, there's something going on there.
Sure.
It's not all great. But even after like the whole fight that ended up in jail, when he was staying with the Fousts, he still regularly went over and visited. Like, they weren't estranged after that.
No, but the Fousts made a point of, or at least Chris did, made a point of saying that his father didn't acknowledge his son when he drove past.
Exactly. That's why it's just, I don't know. It's wild. And again, like I said, most of this stuff is coming from this article that was published 9 months later. And I don't know. It's just an interesting way to approach this time in all of their lives.
Yeah. I'm still curious as to what Chris's angle was here.
Yeah.
What the Faust's angle was.
One thing that both the Fousts and Kadin's family agreed on is that at the beginning of December, Kadin did not seem to be in a good place. So now we're up to December 2022. He's only been living with the Fousts for a couple months. Apparently, his whole lawnmower business didn't go well, allegedly.
It's hard to have a lawnmower business in December in Pennsylvania.
Well, also true. So he had been trying to find a job, but again, according to the article, his pending charges made that difficult, which I don't really know how because he doesn't have a felony on his record.
No, but the arrest would show up on a background check.
Yeah. But like, how many places actually do a background check, honestly, when you're a teenager?
Not that deep.
Right?
No. Yeah.
But regardless, that was the story. He was having trouble because of the pending charges. Now, he was eventually hired by a moving company, but it wasn't a steady schedule, as you can imagine. So apparently, and again, this is according to Chris, on the days he worked, Kadin would come home and go straight to bed. And on his days off, he would often stay up all night playing video games with Ethan. All of this, again, sounds fairly reasonable. Like you could say, like, yes, a moving company is a physically demanding job. Of course, he'd want to go straight to bed. But of course, this is also a guy who is like constantly physically active.
Yeah.
But
whatever.
We'll take it at face value.
Sure.
Kara said that Kadin was feeling down during this time and told her that he wished he had never returned to Pennsylvania. He said that he always screwed up and all he wanted to do was play football, something he couldn't do at the time because he wasn't enrolled in school. So, like, again, it's everything was really heavily weighing on him. Even though it did seem as though things were going pretty well for him at the Fousts, he and Chris were doing all these things, like, it was still tough, you know? I'm sure his relationship with his father and his father's fiance was still strained to some regard, even though, you know, it wasn't an estrangement. He was going over there. He didn't want to go back and live there. He, by all accounts, was still close with his mother and his siblings, but didn't want to go back to Maryland. He'd been kicked out of several schools by this point.
And at this point, is he 18?
Yeah, he's 18. Almost 19. So his birthday, he turned 19 December 10th of 2022. So he was just really lost at this point, it sounds like. So he turned 19 on December 10th, but I actually haven't found anything online about what Kadin did that day, like how he celebrated. On the 11th, though, Chris posted photos of him and Kadin working on the valves in his 4Runner. Later that week, Kadin and his mother spoke on the phone and made plans for Christmas. Kadin was planning on going down to Maryland on Christmas Eve so that he could be there Christmas morning with his mom and all of his siblings. I think I mentioned that Kara was remarried. So Kadin had a stepfather, and they also had a few kids of their own. So in addition to Kadin's 2 brothers, there were another 2, maybe 3 younger half siblings there as well. So it was a big family who was going to be getting together for Christmas down in Maryland.
They're all in Maryland.
Yeah, they're all in Maryland.
Okay.
And again, only about an hour away. So like not super far at all.
Sure.
Kara also asked Kadin what he wanted for Christmas, but he couldn't decide. He apparently kept on going back and forth on a few things, which is very typical. She eventually said that she'd just give him money, and he was like, yep, sounds great. Thank you. On Friday, December 16th, Kadin borrowed Chris's car and went to the bank to deposit his paycheck.
Which car?
So I don't know. I think it was the Corolla. It might have been a Camry, but it was like the sedan.
The sedan.
Yeah. So It wasn't the 4Runner, because from what I understand, it was kind of like in pieces at that point. So while it may have been drivable before, I don't think it was drivable at that moment in time. So he borrowed Chris's car, went to the bank, and deposited his paycheck from the moving company. According to a gas station employee, he also stopped in that morning to gas up and buy some snacks. So later, police, of course, looked at his credit card, right, his debit card, all that kind of stuff, and saw the charge for the gas station. So they went there and asked if they had surveillance video. Thankfully, they did. And according to this employee who was there and watched the video with him, and it was actually the person who rang Kadin up that day. She was like, yeah, he was totally normal. He came, gassed up, bought snacks. Everything was fine. The next day, the Fousts said that Kadin was restless. He had dinner with the family, but then he wanted to go go-kart racing. Chris had just taken his epilepsy medication, and he said he wasn't up to it. Kadin then decided he was going to go to his boxing gym. According to phone records, Kadin called the gym, but it was apparently closing soon, and that was a half an hour away, so he didn't end up going. The gym owner later confirmed that he did speak with Kadin that evening, so it wasn't just that there was a call made from his phone. The gym owner said that it was Kadin he spoke with. The newspaper article says that after that, quote, Kadin retreated to his room on the home's second floor. The Fousts never saw him again, end quote. And I wanted to put that in a direct quote because it's about to become incredibly important. Now, unfortunately, it's going to become incredibly important next week.
Oh, cliffhanger.
I know.
We haven't even gotten to his disappearance.
I know. Blame it on the bus manual, but I could not stop writing. And I truly did not mean for this to be a second two-parter. I don't like to do two-parters in a row because we had the Brianna Maitland case before this. Yeah. But there's just so much going on here. And we are about to get to his actual disappearance. And the issue that we have with some of these recent cases, and I was kind of talking to you a little bit about this before the show, and even though I didn't tell you anything about the case, I was saying that this is, a recent case, and that the issue that we run into is that there's so much stuff on social media, right? So there are people who are posting things. Like I've already mentioned several of like Kara and Chris's Facebook posts. Like there's even more after that there are people posting theories. There are people making accusations. Like there's a lot going on that I think that we need to kind of wade through.
And there's probably not a whole lot coming from police.
Exactly, because it is such a new investigation. So you're right. There really isn't a ton coming from police. Like I can give you like the basic facts of the beginning of the investigation, which we of course will get into. But, most of it after like the first month, they're really keeping to themselves in terms of leads and avenues of investigation. So yes, we will be back next week. I'm so sorry, to talk about Kadin Black's disappearance and the aftermath and the investigation. Now, as always, for those of you who have joined us over on Patreon or Apple Podcasts on a subscription basis, you will be able to get this second episode up early and ad-free. So I'm going to be able to post the two of them basically together, so you won't have to wait a week. But everyone else, this will be our episode next week. One note before we go, Kadin's family has a GoFundMe to hire a private investigator. We'll post the link in our show notes. So please take a look and donate if you're able, or if you're not, please just share on your social media channels. Kadin Black has been missing from York County, Pennsylvania since December 18th, 2022. He is a biracial male with brown hair and brown eyes. He was approximately 5'10" and 160 pounds when he went missing. Kadin was 19 when he went missing. He would be 20 today. Anyone with information regarding Kadin Black's disappearance is asked to call the Lower Windsor Township Police Department at 717-244-8055 or Crime Stoppers of Pennsylvania at 1-800-THE-LOST. You can also submit a tip anonymously online at york.crimewatchpa.com/Lower Windsor TWPPD. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheywere.gone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, And Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram and TikTok. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week, or right now, for part 2 of Kadin Black.
See you then.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by me, Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!